as a means to sort of specifically dive into the individual subjectivity of the author of the subject matter, if you will, and sort of thinking metacritically, I guess, if you will, about how you deal with that. So, just as a little background, I don't know how many of you are familiar with the actual novel, but the Xenogenesis, I'm having trouble as well, trilogy is set roughly 250 years in the future, following an apocalyptic event on Earth and the rescue, colonization, and subjugation of humanity by the alien Oankali, consequently setting a stage where the rescued humans have been involuntarily displaced from their own known world to an otherworldly spacecraft, only to be genetically modified, hybridized, and later reintegrated with a post-human Earth. The Xenogenesis trilogy speaks metaphorically to the African American slave experience of a violent cultural, temporal, and geographic displacement, along with the inevitable cultural and genetic overlapping, hybridization, and creolization that must accommodate such an act. So again, to go back to method and sort of approach, I've come to this sort of space, I guess, if you will, to stay on topic of minor literature, building on Deleuze and Guattari's theory as such from their Kafka toward minor literature. Whereby minor literature is a minority voice within a majority language, not as a smaller, lesser literature, but as a literature of minority voices within the majority language. Consequently, I'm framing it beyond sort of linguistics or language towards sort of a larger socio-historic cultural sphere of influence and power. As a voice within a larger power structure that has a specific place and sort of a vantage point or platform that they can speak from. It's a voice that's both inside and outside, and I think to go back to something that we spoke about earlier, this sort of heterotopic space, which offers really, a unique sort of line of flight or potential engagement with the text when you consider it as such. So in going back to Butler's work and the Xenogenesis trilogy, there's sort of a duality and overlapping between the Oankali and the human. Humanity is lost; it's being eradicated, but yet the way that it is, the way the way that it's being done is sort of unique. The Oankali, while criticizing the humans as being both hierarchical and intelligent, are using the same language to exert their power over them. This becomes interesting again to go back to sort of an engagement of method, like how do you engage with a text and with this space of minor literature or of subaltern perspectives? Is it ethical to subject your text or your work to a discourse that would interpret and place it within your own sphere of influence, or do you engage with it in another fashion? Deleuze and Guattari talk at great length against the idea of interpretation, but towards the idea of activation. How can you aid, support this work that you're engaging with? I want recently to think of sort of our act as literary critics or art historians as a means of curation, sort of a curatorial responsibility where the idea is to care for the work. It's not so much about like a right or wrong interpretation of the work as such, but again, a means to sort of activate it within a space or a frame of context. A consideration of context, I think, is actually what I'm wanting to speak to more broadly. So again, in thinking about Butler's work, again, I keep coming back to this theme, like how do you do this? what can the work do instead of what does it do? Sort of a present active tense instead of a sort of a past tense, if you will. Now to to try to stay on target. Again, forgive me, I'm trying to just speak instead of just reading what I've written. But let me return quickly. Octavia Butler is she's an African-American female author writing in the genre of science fiction. That she works within is, again, to repeat what I've said, is a space of modern literature. She is sort of subverting and challenging a literature that has typically, historically spoken to sort of British imperialism in space. Right. So she has notably said in many interviews that she wants to write herself in, if you will, as though it's happening in her own neighborhood, a way to sort of phenomenologically sort of relate it to her own being in this world, if you will. So, this is very interesting, and I think something that speaks to this idea of contrasting narratives of environment, in that she doesn't offer definitive conclusions. She doesn't have an answer necessarily to anything, but speaks to a space of ambiguity, um, to the unknown, towards sort of the inevitable changing aspects of life, and you know her own lived experience, which again I think is quite interesting. So gosh, I feel like I'm getting off topic, but her engagement with science fiction, with the English language, if you will, is inherently political, in that by challenging the ways that one would conceive science fiction, she is suggesting that maybe there aren't any answers. Maybe there's not a real way to sort of actively offer a geopolitical intervention that is right or wrong. It maybe simply is. They're there, there's so many questions that I'm trying to explore in this larger project. Again, I'm finding a little bit of difficulty in narrowing it down to this 10-minute talk. Interestingly, the majority of the scholarship on her work is fairly divided, whereas many scholars, notably Donna Haraway, has spoken for the Oankali way, that they are nonviolent, that they are producing change, that this movement is ideal for sort of her post-human ideation of what the world can be, and the others taking the human side. Again, this sort of ambiguity is I don't know, a very real thing. It's not that there is an answer, is an answer. Uh, I don't know. I seem to be getting a little lost. Forgive me. um, so let me go into the text a little bit, if this will help. So what we're given is a narrative of humanity as having been saved from an extinction of their own doing. However, upon salvation, the remaining humans have been genetically altered without consent. They've been given heightened immune systems, extra strength, increased lifespans, but their ability to reproduce in the normal human way has been removed for their own good. Uh, Reproduction is restricted to a union between humans and the Oankali, producing a wholly new species. The Oankali go as far as to state that they need us now. They won't have children without us. Human sperm and egg will not unite without us. Ways of living must change. The Oankali present a narrative of salvation, of nonviolence, and of care for all living things. What seems to be a genuine appreciation of difference as a fundamental cultural drive. The Oankali see humanity as inherently flawed through the contradictory aspects of intelligence hierarchical tendencies, their want for power over others, and the intelligence to do so. Consequently, the Oankali worldview sees humanity's propensity towards hierarchical balance as a quantifiable difference to their own supposed value of life, qualifying then the Oankali to rule, govern, and subject humanity to their own accord. Humanity, in contrast, simply wants to live or exist as they were, to be in control of their own destinies. Now, while I think the Oankali mean well, the logic of their position rests on a type of enlightenment rationality whereby they create a dominion by way of sameness, meaning the dominant power exudes control of the subaltern other through and by way of difference, whereby those who do not exhibit the same priorities as the ruling class are considered beneath and need ruling. The other then becomes subjects of and by the ruling class. The reigning humans of the Xenogenesis trilogy are told it will be done our way, not yours. So, regardless of the seemingly dialectic nature between humans and Oankali, change does happen. Second and third novels of the trilogy speak to this change, but the ambiguity is ever present. To go back a little bit, 3 novels begin with Lilith and sort of this originary moment of rupture and dislocation between humanity and their sort of savior, potentially slaver, Oankali subjugator. The second and third novel follow the second and third generation of hybridization and as such. Whereby in the second novel, we're introduced to a human hybrid Oankali named Akin, who speaks for humans, but ultimately they're sent to Mars and sort of is something reminiscent of the Trail of Tears, if you will, in America. Given the opportunity, but as long as it's not with us, so to speak. In the third novel, Imago, Jodas, the primary character and sort of ultimate or final stage of this hybridization, even though he offers something of a new trajectory, he ultimately sort of aligns himself with colonizing alien. I think sort of the problems I'm having with this novel and what I really want to speak to today is like, how do we engage with that? How do we deal with that as critics and art historians? This sort of
13 minutes.
All right, sorry, I've gotten off track and going on a tangent. But so to summarize, sort of that's the question that I really want to talk to is, how do we engage with these contrasting narratives of environment, contrasting narratives of space? Is it possible to look at things objectively, or are we sort of limited to our sort of hierarchy of reader author authority? So I don't know. I'm probably better to just stop there before I go off any further. So I don't know. Maybe there's some questions. Maybe I've just ruined this whole thing, but hopefully, I don't know. It seeds for thought, I guess, if you will. So.
Thank you very much indeed, William. To borrow some of the conversation from the last panel, not so much ruins as not tall ruins, in fact, these wonderful spaces of possibility that you've opened up for us. And I think particularly this emphasis on methodology and approach, that sort of the ethical and curatorial questions of approaching texts, I think are going to provide us with some wonderfully interesting things to talk about in the eventual discussion. So thank you very much. Oh. Okay, then, for the moment anyway, and again, just a reminder, if everyone will continue to, as you're already starting to do, to type in questions, thoughts, comments, observations, random sidebars into the chat. We'll continue on then with our second speaker for today. You see, Manuela, are you ready to go? I'll introduce you now if you are.
Yes.
Excellent.
Right.
Then Manuela Palacios, welcome. She is a senior lecturer of English at the University of Santiago de Compostela in Spain. She has directed 5 research projects on contemporary Irish and Galician literature that have been funded by the Spanish Ministry of Science, and has edited and co-edited several books in relation to this topic. And her paper today is Anomalous Encounters, Humanimal Spaces in Contemporary Ecopoetry by Irish Women Writers. Thank you very much, Manuela.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me all right? And can you see the presentation?
Yeah, sorry,
Hello?
can I just say for people, if you're not viewing the presentation, you have to choose the speaker's view. So it's upper right corner, just in case you can't see it. Okay, thanks. Sorry.
All right. So you can you hear me and see the presentation? Yes?
Yes.
Yes,
All
yes,
right.
all
Thank
good.
you. Thank you very much. All right. So the keywords of my presentation are humanimal spaces, because these are the spaces where the encounters between human and more than human nature take place. Also ecopoetry, because it's poetry that puts nature at the forefront. And also Irish women poets, because they have not been visibilized sufficiently. And literature is also space. And spatial justice is also about visibilizing women writers. So the poems that I will be discussing are from the Word Arc, this anthology published by the Daedalus Press in 2020. And you have there the list of poets and the titles of the poems. Since this is being recorded, you may go back to the slides for the information. So I won't be reading everything on the slides. So the spaces that I will be focusing on are the sacred, the out-of-bounds space, the liminal, the bog, and the domestic. The theoretical frame for my presentation is basically animal studies as applied to literature or literary criticism, as applied also to the social sciences, philosophy, and also geography. And eco-criticism in Ireland, in particular with ecopoetry, and also womanhood and animality in Irish literature, and also animal ethics and feminism from the point of view of ecofeminists and philosophers. All right, so the objectives of this presentation are that through the analysis of a selection of poems, of encounters between human and more than human animals, I want to identify the ways in which ecopoetry relates to speculative writing. Space may facilitate the meeting of human and more than human nature, and also may question our hierarchical dualisms, and also the ways in which the intersectional analysis of space, gender, human, and non-human life may contribute to a better understanding of spatial relations and spatial justice. The first poet and the first poem that I will be dealing with is The Bad by Catherine Phil McCarthy. And the space that I'll focus on here is the sacred space, because it is a poem about the unexpected entrance of a bat in a church during the religious ceremony of communion. The bat is the protagonist, and you know that behind the bat there is a Gothic literary tradition, horror fiction such as in Bram Stoker's Dracula with the evil blood-sucking monster. So in the poem there is a contrast between the religious and the profane. The animal that has a few minimal threatening elements with the dark wings, the night skies, but in particular, this word eerily, which etymologically means evil, bad. However, the impression the poem leaves on us is an amused one, because you see the children fascinated with the bat flying around the church. And I could say that the poem divests the animal of its symbolic malevolence and takes pleasure in the grace and agility of its movements, and that the poem allows us to look at the animal as animal. Also, it's very interesting to see the children bat complicity, their innocence, their curiosity, after they are disentangled from the sacredness and the inherited cultural traditions. The following poem is Old Bear by Eva Bergh, and it's about the out-of-bounds space. The protagonist is a bear, and she's presented as she, So we are going to see here notions of female vulnerability and the animal rendered in domestic terms. So the first stanza has the bear appearing on a freeway, and look at the way she is described. Her coat, dusty and threadbare, like an old sofa. And the second stanza explains that the animal is looking for food, but apart from this concrete material need and the vulnerability of the animal, we also see the animal as a visionary animal. Look at the line, to search for the bees of the horizon. So the poem certainly criticizes the reduced spaces for wildlife and the lack of access to food. The following poem is set in a liminal space. It's by Grace Wells, and the title is Vixen. Now, it's a liminal space because the female fox approaches human habitats in order to feed. And the poetic persona is awed by this encounter with wildness. And what is very important is that the poetic persona recognizes her own animality. The poem says, she brought us the part of ourselves that wasn't fully human. And she wants to go with a vixen as well. Here you have examples of similarities between human and animal behavior, but towards the bottom of the slide, you have the conclusions that the foxes occupy these liminal spaces because they are wild but come very close to humans. Actually, the poetic persona wants to protect them. And regarding spatial justice, we could say that we'll need to learn from liminality, our own liminality, and that we need to come to terms with our animality. Regarding gender, we see a woman-animal identification in the poem because the woman wants to liberate herself from constricting social norms. That's why she wants to go with a vixen. The following poem is Irish Elk by Catherine Phil McCarthy. Again, the space is going to be the bog. Actually, the beginning is a Christmas setting with a deer of electric bulbs in a suburban garden. But very soon, the rest of the poem introduces the motif of the extinct great Irish elk. And this is a misnomer because it's not exclusively Irish and it's not an elk. It's a giant deer. And the Irish elk is here presented as rising out of the bog and coming back to life and roaming forests and suburban areas like a ghost. Now, it's also a poem that deals with identity because the animal belongs to Ireland, the way it is presented, and Ireland belongs to the elk. The animal is claiming its space back. Also, Seamus Heaney wrote about the great Irish elk and the bogland, but the conclusion here at the bottom of the slide is that the relevance of this poem for eco-criticism is that it presents ancient times before humankind dominated the earth. So it decenters humankind, even in the physical aspect, because the elk is twice as tall as man. Well, the following poem, and I'm just approaching the end of my presentation, is on encountering a cockroach in Cyprus. You can imagine what it is about, by Catherine Duffy, and the space we could say is the domestic. And so here we find a first-person poetic persona addressing a roach as you, that she finds in a tourist apartment. And she says that she's very tolerant of, all these little creatures, and also that she has learned about religions that are more tolerant towards animals. So she decides not to kill the roach. And she simply locks the animal in the bathroom. However, she spends a terrible night. She becomes paranoid. She has nightmares. Now, what is interesting is that the following morning, she realizes that, fear produced a very distorted perception that the animal is not, as menacing as she first thought. And also, what we see in this poem is the fact that we see a hysterical reaction, and that again because the animal is actually not so menacing. And the last poem is Animal Encounters by Grace Wells, again, the domestic space. And we have a woman arriving home late at night, finding her kitchen infested with ants. This may have happened to all of you. And we see her violent reactions to get rid of them. The language is full of hyperboles, extreme violence, but it is not devoid of humor, because her reaction is totally disproportionate. Look at the language: a crazed exterminator, murderous rage. So what we see here, the second point on the slide, is that these two poems of domestic encounters reveal that phobias are stronger than rationality in human beings. And even though rationality is supposedly the characteristic that differentiates human beings from animals, we see that humor laughing the hysteria off. And also we see that phobia, fear, hysteria, paranoia, nightmares, they give rise to the more speculative, non-realistic aspects of the poem. Also, we see this strong attachment to one's place, the sense of property and propriety that excludes the animal. So the concluding remarks are that the speculative mode is especially hospitable to the animal and to the human-animal encounter, and you have the examples there, that humanimal spaces were in these poems initially constructed for humans only, the home, the church, the freeway, the suburb, but are occupied by animals in what is perceived as an anomalous encounter. But that anomalous encounters actually challenge human rationality, that fear, phobia, paranoia, and foster fantasy. Regarding woman and animality, we see two different aspects. On the one hand, the conflictive encounter inside domestic spaces with the woman, the home, the property, the propriety. And then a very different aspect is that of the woman yearning for wildness or the vulnerability of the wild animal as female and as domestic. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Manuela. Oh, it's nice thing. You've that's a wonderful. That sounds like a wonderful anthology, or rather, you've made it sound like a wonderful anthology. I think we're all rushing off. I think we're all rushing off to lay hands on it. I know I am. No. Okay, everyone. Just to note, we probably won't be able that we first and our fourth speaker, Sona, won't be joining us, so we'll go straight on to what's probably our last speaker for today, and then we'll open up to our questions. So. So Ibrahim, I'll introduce you now if you're ready.
Yes, I'm ready.
Excellent, just checking. Nice to see you. Now, so Ibrahim Syed Fawzy is a teaching assistant at Fayoum University in the Faculty of Arts, Department of English, Egypt. And his paper today is on preserving the environment as a way to self-realization in the Eastern and Western thoughts, an eco-critical reading of two classic survival narratives. Over to you.
Okay. Can you see my screen? And can you hear me clearly?
Yes, we see and we hear.
Okay. The aim of this presentation is to investigate the relationship between man and the surrounding environment, and how this relation leaves its impact on man's attitude towards basic issues such as self, other, the purpose of life, and what constitutes right or wrong, and finally supersede all of this to the realm of the abstract, where human being gains knowledge of the absolute by assessing Ibn Tufayl al-Andalusi's Hayy ibn Yaqzan and Daniel Defoe's Robinson Crusoe, not as self-contained texts, but as cultural products that have not dropped from nowhere. As for Ibn Tufail and Al-Andalusi's Hayy ibn Yaqzan, Yaqzan's attitude towards the environment is admirable and in line with Islamic teachings. The Prophet Muhammad says, should the day of judgment strike while you are planting a tree, just carry on. And let me say it in Arabic. إذا قامت الساعة وفي يد أحدكم فسيلة فليغرسها. Total immersion in the physical environment leads Hayy to the concept of the unity of the universe. He realizes that all bodies, whether animate or inanimate, are one thing. Accordingly, he believes that all things are endowed with valuable life that should be respected. This could be the reason why Hayy not only respects all forms of life, but also thinks of everything as endowed with valuable life, since he sees the whole universe as one great being. Through careful observation and employment of reason, Hayy defines himself worlds of animals, plants, things, nature of heavens and God Almighty. He harmoniously connects with them and classifies himself amongst them. So Hayy is a strict preserver of the physical environment, while Croso is a prodigious consumer. As for rocks and mountains, Hayy has great respect for them. He believes them to be endowed with a rich spiritual force, together with the ability to transmit this force to whoever lives there. It's remarkable that prophets usually received God's revelation while secluded in caves and mountains. The issue of Hayy's existence is itself an evidence of man's innate love for earth. In one version, Hayy is said to have been born for Mother Earth with no father. In another, he's said to have just grown on a tree like a plant. Thus, Hayy is connected to both the world of the inanimate and the world of plants. To complete the solid bond, he should also be connected to the world of animals, which is soon achieved when he is adopted by a gazelle that had just lost her young one. At first sight, Hayy ibn Yaqzan could be considered a description of the philosophical journey of its hero, but soon it presents the reader with a manual for preserving the environment. As for the world of the inanimate, Hayy believes that it should not be polluted or violated. If man ever interferes, it should only be to remove obstacles or filth. For example, hindering the natural flow of a stream. Man should rather be a guard, not a consumer of the environment. Hayy takes care never to exhaust the environment. He reaches the conclusion that everything is God's doing, and to unnecessarily destroy it is to undo what God did. He eats only what keeps him alive, and even this is done according to rules. He should limit himself to eating ripe fruits, which are ready to produce more of their kind and would otherwise full of trees and rotten, and then he should make sure to dispose of the seeds where they can grow. He should also vary his food in a way that does not expose any particular species to extinction. Hayy makes it his duty to God to help everything reach its full potential. And to move to Daniel Defoe's Robinson Crusoe, we find that Crusoe, on the other hand, is a prodigious consumer of the environment. Only his bad fortune throws him on the island to be alone with nature. He falls in a frenzy of accumulating and preserving food that sometimes goes bad. Crusoe kills animals and cuts trees down for no real necessity. He particularly launches a racial cleansing campaign against cats when he finds that he has enough of them by shooting them or drowning their young ones. Crusoe deems the environment an enemy, and the environment an intelligent, sensitive being responds accordingly. He resorts to a cave seeking warmth and protection. And warmth and protection are all that the cave offers. The cave denies Crusoe the spiritual pleasure he offers Hayy. So the two classic novels present two different attitudes towards the environment. The first views it as an intelligent being, human beings equal and friend. It's also man's vehicle to self-knowledge and self-realization. It endows man with spiritual energy to be united with the ultimate reality. This view dictates that man should limit his interference in the environment to a minimum. According to this view, it's man who should comply to the environment and not vice versa. The other side believes that to preserve his life and for his own good, man has to mold the environment to suit his purposes. It is the environment that should comply to man, not vice versa. Finally, I find myself, and I think so do you, rather inclined to accept the first view, which elevates human beings to spiritual and philosophical heights that endow them with the ability to consider sophisticated truths about themselves, life, and the universe. Thank you so much.